Hi all, I'd like to talk about science and the national interest. Now, science is a public good. It does a lot to drive the economy, but also to drive our quality of life. In fact, studies have been done showing that since World War II, investment in science and technology has driven approximately half of US economic growth. And there are similar figures for recent years within Europe. So science provides a massive return on investment, but also it is not just that return on investment, it's the kind of society it creates and the kind of jobs it creates. The kind of jobs that we want for the future, high-skilled jobs that are connected with the world. And this also then involves our universities. Oxford recently announced its 150th spin-out. One of the companies over the years since 1959, since it's been spinning things out, is now worth a cool $1 billion. And the number of spin-outs are ramping up. And when these spin-outs get involved in the communities, then they generate jobs for everyone, jobs for all. The painter-decorator, the security guard, the cleaner, the local hospitality. Think of a Silicon Valley effect of crowding in. But it's not just the businesses that universities spin out, it's also those small innovative businesses already in the community that are increasingly pairing up with our universities in order to get that administrative support, in order to get that access to grant money, access to partnerships in our country and further afield. This is what we are looking at. This is now why our government has finally put science at the center of our industrial strategy and is finally promising, alongside the other parties, in manifestos of General Election 2017, to ramp up science investment. We recognize that science, technology, and higher education are all strongly in the national interest. And this is where the EU comes in. There are 3 science powerhouses in the world, and they are the EU, the US, and China in that order. You can speak about the EU collectively as a powerhouse because the EU has been the glue linking our countries together into a highly competitive collaborative network which has really come good of recent years. We have, in the European Union, collectively more scientists than does the US or China. The gap with the US is growing. We produce more scientific output than the US, and that gap is growing. We have overtaken the US for highly cited output in recent years. It has been a massive success story. In terms of crude funding measures, about 17% of our university science funds are coming from the EU currently. More importantly, while our science funding nationally has been stagnant since about 2010, on the EU level, the science programs have been ramping up funding from 55 billion under the previous science program to 77 now, to the projected one being 100 billion, with the UK excluded. If we were to be included, that would be 115. So on the EU level, they know the value of this investment, and that is why over the last few years, 73% of the growth in our funding of science at universities has come from the EU, because they have been pushing that and we have been riding that. And this isn't just extra money. We know that this multinational framework of collaboration allows you to put together world-leading dream teams that you can pick and mix from right across our continent and further afield. And that adds value, serious value. Comparing domestic-only UK research with international UK research, when we're collaborating with other countries, there's a 40% boost on the impact there. That is what we are looking at. And this is why science is in the national interest and the EU is in the interest of our science and technology. And you can see how this is, the EU then has provided a powerful driver with that framework for our future economic direction. But don't just take it from my sophistry on the issue. If you look at the science community and science policy community, about 90% of the science community was for Remain. Those who specialize in science policy and see the meta picture, for the last 25 years, the science ministers, that cover the last 25 years were all for remaining, as were 13 Nobel Prize winners, as was the late Stephen Hawking and 150 members of the Royal Society. There was not a single Vice-Chancellor in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland or Wales that was for leaving. However, that's not what happened during the referendum debate. And so my priority immediately after that vote was twofold. One was to map the immediate damage that we saw, and secondly was to think about what is in the national interest with regard to science and universities and our relationship with the EU after Brexit. What we did in terms of mapping, we did a survey where we saw that there were jobs turned down already, people saying they would leave already, with a few already having left, actually. There were broad concerns about the brand of the UK, uncertainty going forward, collaborations that were planned were starting to fall apart, and there was freezing of jobs and investment. We put a lot of those stories out to press because squeaky wheel gets the grease. I wanted it to be front and centre, what was happening with science, but a lot of these factors have been under the radar since. There's this constant hemorrhaging and bleeding with the uncertainty and the mistreatment of EU citizens. We have seen more spectacularly our loss of the European Medicines Agency, the problems with the Galileo satellite program, and also the bizarre, sudden, unannounced departure of Euratom, which no one was advocating. So what is in the national interest now? For science and overall, well, for science, obviously, the closer relationship we have, the better. And so that is what I argued for independently and immediately, and so does the rest of the community. This is our community within science. There are no foreigners in science. We are all a global network with a particular hub in the EU, and we need to preserve that from politics, whatever happens, because that is a benefit to all of us. But in terms of the bigger picture, I have always maintained, and more people are becoming vocal about this now, that the Brexit referendum was a franchise given to the public, but now should not be taken away. The public have the right to hold the chain to whatever happens and pull it away from this government if this government is trying to do something that does not fit with their expectations. And so this is why a mechanism such as the people's vote, a deal when whatever Theresa May brings back, can be vetted by the public at large to see if it delivers that which was promised, is a continuation of that franchise, a democratic franchise offered to the public, and I think is only fair and logical, and that is what we are petitioning for. And specifically, I think at this stage, it's safe to say that should that come along, I would be petitioning that we would, whatever deal comes back, I think it's fairly clear that it is not as good as what we have now. And I realise that dropping Brexit causes some societal problems and some serious societal problems, but nothing like the headache that then happens if you go through with it, if the public are unhappy with it, and you've got no finances to patch up the fires with. Now, I'm a scientist, and experiments are fine, and we learn by trial and error, and that's all fine and that's all good. But if a trial is going wrong, you step in and you stop it for ethical reasons. And I think that would be in the national interest and in the interest of the vast majority of the people within this nation. And so that is why, from the standpoint of science and technology and higher education and the national interest, it's time to say we need a people's vote on the deal, with absolutely the people being empowered to ditch Brexit. Thank you.